So Chad, a really big question that we get a lot after you've done a seminar, you open it up for Q&A. People ask, hey, I want to know the companies that I'm invested in, the companies that I own pieces of. What if I don't feel aligned with those companies? Ethically, is there a conflict of interest? Let's talk about that today.
Welcome to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. I am your host, Chad Hufford, and this is the podcast where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the working world. Each week, we dive into the incredible stories of honest, hardworking folks who have found financial success through grit, determination, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. So if you're ready to be inspired and learn how to turn your hard work into your own success story, you're in the right place. This is the Blue Collar Millionaire Show.
All right, so thank you for joining us for another episode of the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. I'm Logan Hufford. Of course, we've got Chad Hufford here with us today, and we're going to dive in to a topic that comes up every now and again, and it's a really good question that we want to tackle. Chad, I want to see what you have to say about this question and some of the things around it.
Yeah, so what you're essentially asking is, what does somebody do when their investments don't align with their personal values, or how are they to think about that?
Or should they think about it?
And it does come up, not just in seminars, it comes up in individual conversations, and people are wondering, they hear something on the news and this is what this one company is doing. Am I investing in that company? And we have such an interconnected world that it is very, very difficult to separate yourself from any major company out there and invest in anything. So just think of like somebody who is, they don't want to invest in a particular social media company. So right. Meta, they got Facebook, Instagram, and all that. Okay, there's a lot of what those companies stand for that I disagree with. A lot of things that they do I don't agree with. I personally don't have social media accounts. I mean, Veritas does. I interact on that a little bit. But not just morally and ethically, just the fact that for a lot of folks, it's a huge time waste.
Right.
Yeah, but every company that I love advertises on those platforms. So when I buy anything, I'm still supporting Meta. And you think about somebody who's like, okay, well, I mean, that's fine. Social media is everywhere, but I don't want to invest in any oil companies. Okay. Well, if you live in Alaska, everything you do is funded by oil. Right. I mean, most of our economy, a huge part of our economy in Alaska is funded by oil taxes. And even if it's not, the electric car that you drive, all the plastic in that is an oil product. So like you don't have to pull very far at that thread in order to get to a place where it doesn't make sense anymore. So I'm not saying that you stick your head in the sand, but you have to invest differently than maybe even how you would shop.
Okay.
Because they are all connected. I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
Right.
Like where are you going to shop, and you're going to boycott this store or that store.
Right.
But it's kind of like that same idea, but all these companies are so interconnected, and especially publicly traded companies. Like it's one thing if it's a small company and they're just doing absolutely horrendous stuff. I mean, there are checks and balances in place, but it doesn't mean that some of the companies that you might own might be investing in things that you don't agree with.
Yeah. That
your ethical standards might be different than what that company is doing. And that's one of the reasons we don't do individual companies. We use mutual funds. And I mean, yes, technically your money might still be making it to that company, but it would anyway. Even if you don't own it, you just by shopping and living the way you normally do, money is going to eventually get to places and do things that you don't agree with.
Right.
I think one example that we could even look at is taxes. I think everybody listening or watching probably has some serious disagreements with how their taxes are being used on a municipal level, on a local level, state level, and on a federal level.
Right.
but quit paying your taxes for a while and see how that goes. Like, it's not a good strategy. So, any thoughts so far?
Well, so I mean, there's a few questions, and this is something that I've heard people ask, and I've had it roll around in my brain as well. And so I wrote down a few questions, but at what point does ownership, if I've got a mutual fund and I have pieces of these various companies, at what point does ownership become endorsement? Is there a line at which point you go from one to the other?
Again, it's how far you want to pull on that thread.
Okay.
So, I mean, can you think of an example of a I'll give you time to think about it. Think of an example of a particular issue somebody might have, then maybe we can unpack that in live time. And maybe maybe I'll be able to think as quickly on my feet as I'm hoping. But again, this is, I think, why mutual funds are better, because you are not actively going out and buying that company. And it might seem like semantics, but I think part of this is just keeping our conscience clear. And there's actually a verse in the Bible in 1 Corinthians, towards the end of the book. I think it's chapter 10 or something like that. But there was an issue of the believers in Corinth buying or eating meat that had been sacrificed to pagan gods.
Right.
And Paul even instructs them. He says, eat freely of the meat in the market. I'm paraphrasing here. Eat freely of the meat in the market. But to keep your conscience clear, do not ask where the source of the meat was from. So it didn't change where it was from. But what he's saying is, in the whole grand scheme of things, like, that meat won't defile you. But to keep your conscience clear, don't pull at that thread.
Right.
Don't track it down, because it probably will bother you. And if you know that it says around that same verse, if you know that it is meat that has been sacrificed to idols or pagan gods, then maybe you pass it by. But otherwise, eat freely of it, just don't ask where it came from. And again, that might sound a little bit like you're just burying your head in the sand,
Right.
but it's really, it's the sense that you cannot keep your money from eventually ending up in places that you don't want it to go. If we stay on scriptural examples, I mean, when Christ commanded his disciples, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, render unto God the things that are God, in Matthew, it was an example to not just the disciples but Pharisees. But in another verse, there's a temple tax that he instructs Peter to pay. The same temple that Jesus raided and flipped over all the tables because of what was going on in there. So he was completely against some of the details, but yet this is what we were commanded to do under authority. Like, you can't completely distance yourself from making sure your money ends up only in the places that you want it. If we want to be really extreme, the taxes that he instructed his disciples and followers to pay were the same taxes that paid for his crucifixion.
Right.
So, I do think it is important to, and this really comes down to stewardship, to be mindful of what is happening with your money, but really controlling what you can control, and not to allow this issue to be a scapegoat for poor investing.
Right.
And now there are funds that can filter out some of these things, and we do. I mean, there are filters on the portfolios that we use to make an index a little bit more stringent. That does, especially some of the free trade and companies around, some child labor things. Some of that stuff is filtered out. Not to say something doesn't fall through the cracks, but I don't want this to be again an excuse for poor investing decisions where somebody takes on significantly increased risk, only invest in a few companies that they think align with them perfectly. Pick a company. I guarantee you, your money is still going to end up in places you don't like,
Right.
especially if that company is paying taxes. But in doing so, your conscience might be clear, but now your stewardship has been sacrificed because you're taking a lot more risk. And really, you didn't change the world. You didn't make a dent in what you're trying to do, but now your financial future might be compromised. And to me, as a Christian, I feel like that is the greater of evils, me being a poor steward of my money, rather than trying to hold my money accountable for what it does after it's left my hands. I can't control that.
It's almost it's a different version, but it still reminds me of some of the principles of, of the parable of the talent. Of, I can choose to say, I mean, I guess to mix those, I could choose to say, well, I don't want it to be invested in anything I don't agree with. Therefore, I'm not going to invest it, right? I'm going to take this money, I'm going to stick it under my mattress. And that technically would guarantee it's not going to anything bad, but it's not going to anything.
Untrue.
What is that?
So you stick your money, let's just say you keep it in bank, you keep it in CDs because I don't want it to do anything.
Right.
You think you think Bank of America?
I'm saying literally, like, if I just don't touch it, I'm not going to spend it.
And people usually aren't going to do that. Like this, what we usually get is I won't invest.
Right.
I'm just going to keep it in a money market, keep it in the bank. I'm not going to invest it.
Right.
Like, let's just take that as an example. Just unpacking this for you in lifetime.
Right.
So they're not investing it. They're going to lose money to taxes and inflation.
Right.
They probably end up with a negative return. Put their financial future at extreme risk, possibly even their family, because they're probably going to become a financial drain on their kids and grandkids.
Right.
Very few people can afford much of retirement at all with negative growth. I mean, if you have tens of millions of dollars, maybe you can afford to do this. It's still terrible stewardship.
Right.
But let's just say we ignore all of that. What are the chances that Wells Fargo or Bank of America or whatever financial institution might be doing stuff that you don't like with your money?
Right.
So again, you live in this society, your money is going to do things. So it goes back to that. Control the controllables. While the money is in your hands, be the best steward you can. Once those dollars leave your hands, you are no longer a steward of what that money does.
Right. Well, okay, so you do bring up something I want to pick at a little bit. And, we can just say a big bank, right? I mean, any big bank that you're going to stick your money in because, you're that person, right? You're so concerned about it. Just because we haven't really unpacked this too much on this podcast. So for it, the small percentage of people, maybe that just don't really think about it. What is happening? If I've got $1 million and I'm choosing not to invest it in mutual funds because I don't want to potentially, buy slices of companies that I don't agree with. So I'm going to stick it in my local bank or a big bank, whatever, and it's just going to sit there. But at least I know it's safe because it's just in the bank, and surely nothing bad's going to happen with it. So from a basic level, like, how does that work? What is that money doing?
Well, your money actually doesn't sit there. And keep me from going too far into the weeds, but there's something in banking called fractional reserve, which means if I stick $1 million in a bank, the bank does not have to keep my cash in the bank.
Right.
It has to keep a fraction of it. And I honestly don't know what that percentage is mandated by federal government, FDIC. I don't know what it is, but maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 10%.
Right.
And that isn't necessarily even my dollars. That's just the total deposits in my bank. I have to have a certain fraction of that in reserve. The rest of that then gets lent out to other people, to other businesses. So, I mean, yes, I could, you could deposit your money, $1 million, and then I'm going to go get a loan. And the bank loans me some of your money to buy a house. I'm going to deal drugs out of that house.
Right.
Or
you're going to go
prostitution or whatever.
You go get a signature loan for 10 grand so you can go to Vegas and blow all your money.
Yeah. So there's no way of stopping it.
Right.
But the stewardship is really on us doing what we know, the best that we can. And the way that we operate, again, going back to diversification, it's you never own enough of any one thing to make a killing, but you also don't own enough of any one thing to get killed by it. So if a company does become corrupt and it's very obvious, likely, I mean, the market purges a lot of that stuff. Not always, because our world doesn't value the same things that we necessarily value. So there's that company very well may be purged. Look at all these banks that were in nefarious or at least unethical and certainly improper lending back 2008, they disappeared. But even if they don't, even if they continue on, you're owning such a small percentage of any one company. And most of our clients, Logan, own roughly 10,000 different companies, pieces and parts. You can't monitor the behavior of all those. I think that is the lesser of evils when it comes to stewardship. It's just part of living in a fallen world.
Right. A lot of the questions I wrote down, they're all kind of, it's sort of a spider web where a lot of them all connect back to some of the same basic truths. But, good stewardship in an imperfect world. I'm not going to ask you the question because you've kind of already answered it, but there are certain things that we can control. There's the vast majority of things, right, that we cannot control. And so this is just one more example of that principle that we talk about all the time, right? Focusing on what you actually can't control. And what I hear you saying is if you are a good steward and if you make wise long-term plans and you've invested wisely and it's diversified, what I'm hearing you say is that is freeing you up to actually go out and make a real impact with your life, right? Can you give an example of kind of what that's looked like for somebody, whether it's because they've invested well, they've been a good steward with their personal finances or just everything, but somebody who actually can make a real difference in the world on some level, on some scale, because they have been good and faithful stewards.
So we have several clients, Logan, who are now basically self-funded missionaries who have retired. I mean, one couple just retired last year, almost exactly a year ago. And they now work out in bush villages. He's a carpenter by trade, and she actually has I believe a master's in theology, but because the bush villages are so thirsty for skilled labor, they invite these folks in, and they're able to teach, they're able to help in a very tangible way, but also teach great lessons from scripture to people. And we have people that are able to help their families. I got a text from a client one time that he was just talking about all the wonderful things he's been able to do since retire. Almost all the things he was doing. He was fixing his daughter's car on a moment's notice because there was an issue with his neighbor's roof or basement. I don't remember all the details, but basically the point of the text or email was, and this is just in the course of a few weeks, here's all the things that I've been able to do because I'm not tied to a job anymore. And I've been able to be more present and be more available and take all the skills that this man had built over 30, 40 years, but now deploy them in a much more meaningful way to the people that he loved and that really needed, because some of these people could not afford to pay him for this, right. But he didn't need to because he's financially independent.
He's financially free, got time freedom, energy freedom.
Yep.
That's really cool.
Yep. And just, those might seem like big pushes for a lot of people, but I also look at the generosity that our people have, and we don't necessarily know what everybody's giving, but
right.
But that does come up in conversations. I mean, the folks we work with give away collectively tens of millions of dollars a year,
right?
And those are, they're to churches, the various charities. I mean, they're making a huge impact in the world. That doesn't happen without capital, and that capital being used in companies. As companies grow, they increase their earnings. They pass those earnings on to us, the families we work with, and those families we work with live off some of that and then continue to pass that on to other people. And you look at it in that sense, is it perfect? Absolutely not. But it's a tremendous way to leave a big impact, positive impact on the world.
Yeah. There's a couple more things I want to ask before we wrap up. So you talked about we're not telling people to just be the ostrich that sticks their head in the sand, right? And just pretending that things don't matter, that there's not evil in the world and all that. So, you have somebody that you're talking with and they go, hey, okay, I understand what you're saying. And I'm not going to get too worked up about trying to pick, which stocks but I do want to, I want to be mindful of ethics, right? So what is a healthy way for an investor to think about ethics without becoming overwhelmed or obsessed?
I think people need to look at their lives and look at what is the biggest impact I can make with this burden that I'm feeling.
Okay.
And it probably won't be your investing. might be how you shop, might be how you talk, might be what you listen to and things like that. You got to look the impact on you, but also the impact on the world. But it probably won't be your investing.
Right.
And the other piece of that, I think, is just taking a big picture look at kind of the money trail and thinking through some of the things we've talked about, realizing that, yeah, a lot of your money goes in and gets involved in foolishness at best and
Right.
maybe unethical at worst, probably unethical, maybe even illegal.
Right.
You know, I mean, look at some of these political scandals and stuff like this that are funded by the American public that are illegal scandals. We all funded it. Our dollars went to that.
Right.
And just looking at that in the grand scheme of things, and yeah, it should change how I vote. It should change my involvement in politics. And if people really want to make a difference, we can't sit on the sidelines and complain about, you know, some company that I own a fraction of a percent, not enough to make a difference in their world for sure. But then take a passive role everywhere else. So I think there's areas where we can make even how we instruct and teach and mentor the next generation. I think there's huge ways we can have a much bigger impact of what type of world that we're passing along, much more so than trying to nitpick our investments.
It's good stuff. Thanks for diving in with this.
Yeah. Thanks, Logan. Good questions.
Guys, thanks for joining us, and we'll hope to see you next time on the Blue Collar Millionaire Show.
Thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. We hope this episode has been inspiring and beneficial to you. If you want help on your journey to financial freedom, reach out to us at veritasalaska.com. We'd love to sit down over a cup of coffee with you, either here in our office or virtually, and get to know you and your needs. And though this podcast is free of charge, we do ask that you please do us two quick favors. If you enjoyed the episode, give our pod a great rating on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use, and also give us a follow on Instagram. We hope you have a wonderful day filled with gratitude and intentionality. God bless.